So, far away Nisha, what's your favourite over-the-top bloody moment in a movie?
Any scenes in the Saw films?
Oh, God. Well, this one's not getting monetised. Blood is like seasoning for an action movie in that it's not really necessary, but it can make even a shitty movie that little bit more palatable. Oddly, while over-the-top blood explosions are a staple of the action movie genre today, they only exist because of a mistake over 5 decades ago that nearly saw a guy be lifted into the air by a highly pressurised stream of fake blood.
Okay, so Karl, what film did this mistake happen in?
It happened in the film Sanjuro, which is a samurai epic made by acclaimed big dick director Akira Kurosawa, who is arguably one of the most influential and famous filmmakers of all time, largely because at some point almost every other director on earth has ripped him off whether they know it or not. Nisha, are you familiar at all with the work of Kurosawa?
Not really.
Well, the thing is, even if you're not, you are, because he's one of those people who was so influential. He was just ripped off endlessly by other directors who weren't as good as him, and as a result, his effect on cinema can be felt to this day because of the shit he invented, and like that other people went and went, that's pretty good, I'm just going to take it and not tell him. And my favourite example of that is a film called Seven Samurai, which is a film, oddly enough, about 7 samurai who go to a village and protect it. And then a couple of years later, Hollywood made a movie called The Magnificent Seven, which is about 7 cowboys who go to a little town and save it. It's the exact same concept, but you replace swords with guns.
Yeah.
And like it is literally just, they ripped it off wholesale. And that's like the most egregious example. There's so many other small things that he's responsible for. Like one of the most hilarious we'll talk about in a moment. But first, we need to discuss just one of the most famous aspects of Kurosawa's personality. And that was just his attention to detail when it came to the art of making films.
So obviously you're going to have a few examples of Kurosawa,
Yeah.
doing this.
I have an entire article on the website that we'll no doubt turn into a video one day that details some of the more famous ones, but a more obscure one, I suppose, I just think just highlights how just ridiculous Kurosawa was. A film called Ran, in which he wanted the prop makers to make a castle, which doesn't sound that stupid until you realise that Kurosawa wanted the stones on this castle to look exactly like ones he'd seen on another historical castle in Japan. And when the prop makers asked him, well, how are we supposed to make this castle look like that one? He got some photos of that castle, handed them to the prop makers and said, paint all the bricks on this fake castle to look like this castle, which they did.
Yeah.
And then a couple of weeks later, Kurosawa was like, okay, now I'm shooting a scene where this castle catches fire. And the prop makers were like, well, the castle's made of wood and rubber cement. It'll melt. He went, okay, so what I want you to do now is cover everything you've built with cement and then paint all the stones back onto it again.
Oh, God.
So I want you to do the exact same thing you've just done again. And as I mentioned earlier, there are many, many stories like this about Kurosawa, but a couple of my favourites are, there's another film where he wanted a teacup to look realistically worn. So he had one of the interns on set pour 1,000 cups of tea into the tea set. Another one was for 7 samurai. Each of the titular 7 samurai were given a diary of their character, which they had to study.
Yeah.
So I want you to study this is your character's backstory and add to it as you feel necessary. But the absolute best story about Kurosawa, though, is for one of his films where he approached his prop department like, look, see that river over there? Like, yep, no, make it flow backwards.
What?
And they did for one of his movies. What? Because he wanted to figure out he wanted the river to flow backwards because it was flowing the wrong way. It arguably made for a better movie, and that's like why people largely tolerated Kurosawa. It's like, yeah, he's a nitpicky dick, but his movies are pretty much flawless and will stand the test. Like, these are films that people will talk about 100 years in the future. Like, centuries from now, long after we're all dead, people will still be talking about Kurosawa films and the impact they've had on media as a whole. So yeah, it kind of has a point, but you can't say the same for a scene in Sanjuro.
All right, so which scene in Sanjuro are you referencing?
Well, I'm actually talking about the final climactic scene in Sanjuro, in which the eponymous Sanjuro, the beardiest samurai in Japan, squares off with his rival. And in the original script, it called for Sanjuro to fell his opponent with a single, well-placed strike.
So what was the mistake here?
Well, in the original script, Kurosawa planned for, at the moment Sanjuro struck his opponent, a small, pressurised hose full of fake blood on the guy's chest would split open and just cause a shower of blood. But on the day of filming, the pressure was set just a little bit too high, and instead of there being a small but significant spurt of blood, this happened. And it looks stupid, but that's now like a standard trope of media today. Like, I can't think of a single anime or cartoon show with action in it that doesn't have a direct reference to that. Where someone gets slashed, it's just a cartoonishly large spurt of blood. Like, Samurai Jack has that in every single episode. Like, there is a shot in every episode of Samurai Jack where he slashes a robot and you get the huge spray of oil everywhere.
Doesn't it happen in Dragon Ball as well?
It does, yeah. Not with blood, but you do have, basically the same kind of thing happen when Trunks fights Frieza. And that's now a super big trope in anime that happens all the fucking time. You can draw a line from that directly back to Akira Kurosawa and that mistake. And that's amazing. Even just moving out of the realm of Japanese media or Japanese influenced media, just regular action films routinely have just massive spurts of blood on every gunshot. Again, you can draw a line from that in a roundabout way back to Kurosawa, introducing the concept. People are probably thinking though, but you just said that Akira Kurosawa was a huge stickler for details. Why didn't he just do another take? And the story goes that the actors didn't know that it was a mistake, because they just assumed that must be what Kurosawa wanted, so they tried their damnedest not to react to it in a way that would ruin his shot. And the actor who gets slashed reported that, it was really hard to stay on my feet, because the sheer amount of force of the blood spraying out of my chest nearly lifted me into the air, and it took everything I had not to get knocked over.
Jesus.
Which resulted in that really awesome shot of him just tensing as his entire body just explodes. But the prop guys did know that it was a mistake, and they were shitting themselves. So they knew what Kurosawa was like. Oh God, no, we've just ruined the final climactic shot of the film. We've ruined the best shot of the film. And Kurosawa burst out laughing. He's like, it's amazing, I love it. We're not doing another take. The film's perfect. You've made it better. Leave it in.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And they went, well, I guess we're just not doing another take then. Fuck it, leave it in. And it's just very amusing to me that one of the best parts of the action genre is a direct result of a mistake in the movie of one of the most famously pedantic filmmakers of all time. And Faraway Nisha, you mentioned at the start of this video that you like the Saw movies?
Yeah, I do like it. I'm not a huge fan of horrors in general, but I do like the Saw series. Although I am quite squeamish. I find it really hard to watch them at the same time.
But that's the idea behind the films, is it's and that's why they end up getting so cartoonishly ridiculous by the end.
Yeah.
Because by the fifth or sixth movie, it's how convoluted a system can we devise to hurt somebody? And in keeping with the theme of today's video of inspiring an entire genre, the Saw franchise did inspire, the torture porn genre? We have films like Hostel and things like that, where basically it's just 2 hours of someone just getting their shit wrecked by a psychopath. I will give credit to some of those movies, just, as I said, the very interesting ways they devise to hurt people. Because you look at them and you go, I never thought that was a way you could hurt a human, and now I'm scared of it.
Yeah.
Like the one in, I think it's one of the Hostel movies, where, oh yeah, I'm a failed doctor, and he just cuts the guy's Achilles tendon. And you're like, oh no, I didn't even think of that as a way to hurt yourself. And now I'll never stop thinking about it.
Oh, they do that in The House of Wax.
I've not seen that film. Is that the Paris Hilton one?
Yeah.
The only thing I know about that film is that Paris Hilton's in it and she dies. So what happens in that one then?
The first person who gets like captured, because it's just like young adults on a trip and they get stuck in this town. This guy, actually played by Jared Padalecki, who plays one of the guys in Supernatural.
Oh, okay. And he plays the villain?
He's in it. No, he's not the villain. He's the first person to get killed.
Oh no, that must be rough for you to watch.
But there's a moment where you just see a hand come out like a grate, and with like these scissors, and they just snip his Achilles heel, and I'm like, ugh.
Oh, that's such a specific way. And again, I'd never thought of it until I watched like Hostel, and that happened. Like, I'm curious about this movie, like, because I just, what are you going to do to try and top the previous one? And I don't think they can get much worse. And then every time I say that, I'll get recommended a movie where something worse happens. Like, oh no! So I'll move away from that, and it's like, no, just blood used as like a seasoning to just enhance action, which is what Kurosawa used it for in Sanjuro. And I'm a big fan of the ones they do in The Raid, where every now and again there'll just be like that one hit that just like is just emphasised by a spurt of blood, and it just really adds to like, the visceral impact of the combat in that movie. And like one for me just has to be like in the very first one, just a guy gets tackled, and when he's on the floor, the guy pulls a gun out and puts it all the way to the side of his head while he's on the floor and pulls it at point blank range. It's like, what even is that? Who thought of that? But I will give big props, though, to what I think might be the hardest hit I've ever seen anyone take in any movie. And there's no blood. And it is in The Raid 2, which I watched again recently. And it is the penultimate fight scene where it's Rama versus Hammer Girl and Batman. Yeah. And during that fight, Rama, he kills Hammer Girl, and Batman gets so mad. And I honestly don't know how the actor himself, Iko Uwais, walks away from this, because during the fight scene, the guy swings a baseball bat directly at his hip bone, hits him in the hip as hard as he can, and lifts him into the air. And like, it's the hardest impact I've ever seen in anything. And I'm like, how did he survive this? It's like, of all the things that happen in that movie and all the blood and guts and gore, that one still gets me, because it just hits him right square on the hip bone and lifts. It's like, oh God, that's fucking rough.